Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to episode 21 of Everything Meta. And today we're going to talk more about the journaling process. And I'd like to thank T for sending me this podcast. Actually, it was a Twitter space that I used to kind of build the foundation for this episode, and more information on that is in this scrolling banner below. So if you want to follow that, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you will find information on that Twitter space there. Please do support uh, the Crypto Sapiens Twitter space. Thank you. Joey, how are you doing today?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. So the I should also probably point out, if you're watching, if you're looking at the banner, you'll see the way at the end. I guess one of Joey and I, we have a common hero, if you will, and that's Kobe. Today is his birthday as we're recording. Um, so we're gonna have 8 questions. It's either that or 24 questions. Much better have 8. Leaves way more time for a conversation. We're having 8 questions in honor of number 8, and just take a quick second to acknowledge someone that was important to us both, man. So first question is science as a public good. Now I have a clip, and I'm not sure if you've even heard. Did you listen to this Twitter space by chance?
I don't think so.
Cool. Easier for me. Easier for me. All right. So I'll start with the clip then, so that we can get a baseline for what they're saying, and then I'll double back and kind of get your feedback and opinion.
The first episode was about what is DeSci, which is very, very broad and general. We covered science as, in general, what is science, how to decentralize it, what does that mean, science as a social activity, concepts of refi and decentralized society, and really connecting people, and essentially kind of like open sourcing it with, connecting the end users of science with the quote unquote developers, right? It's the actual scientists. And same thing with connecting scientists and citizens with funding, right? So that's kind of what the next 2 episodes, the last 2 were about, funding, IP, and ownership, and then reputation and censorship and publication and peer review. And so here we are, having covered all this, and now today we're discussing is, science as a public good. What does that mean? And so if science is a public good, how do we align essentially the individual, and this is my question to you all, to start things off, how do we align the individual incentives of participants in science, people doing it, with the collective good of having something as a public good that is accessible to everyone, in that sense, in the sense of having knowledge of it, right? So not being behind paywalls, having publications, literally just accessible to people in a simple way. And so that's my question. How do we align those two interests, right? The larger collective and the individuals that are actually doing it. And I know, Eric, again, there's some great work on impact certificates and retroactive funding, but what are your personal perspectives on, this is open to anyone, the sort of addressing this issue and really making science public good? How can we actually get there?
Now,
Your mic,
I think,
by the way.
what happened? It's doing something different.
It was doing the thing during the replay.
Uh-oh. Okay. Let me try something.
I didn't know if it was the recording or the mic, but then once you spoke, it confirmed it.
How about now?
Sounds good. Yeah. Sorry, Ken.
No problem, man. I'm glad you told me. I'd rather know than not. Let's see. All right. Hopefully this stays good. So we'll see. Now, the thing that I think is important about this is probably the million, billion, trillion dollar question. If we knew the answer, I think we'd be much further along already. So I don't know if we're looking for definitive answers or just more ideas. I mean, this conversation seems to have started off on the same vein as similar conversations that we've had on the show, personally and on the show. It is the question of how to change how science is done in some ways, in terms of the reporting process, which is the journaling process, without cheapening it and without selling it. So, I mean, just based on what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear science as a public good?
Well, first off, okay, I'm not like the scientific mind, that should be commenting on some of this. Okay. My main focus and main objective, and then also any involvement in some scientific effort would be to help foster some growth, and help facilitate bringing something to market, and also like talent scouting, right? To find, if there's something that is going to save the salmon, right? Like, who is that person? Is there something that's going to, save this geographical region of crops, right, that are suffering from drought or whatnot? Then, so that that would be me. I am not, there's other people, let's just put it that way. There's other people that have a better perspective on how to answer a lot of these questions. We should, we should bring them on here so that I don't get in
Yeah.
trouble. You know, but science is a public good. I mean, goodness, I think that the society, the world will be facing a set of challenges coming up here in the for the next generation or next few generations that we will have to address. And you can either address it by becoming more resilient, being better at survival, right? So on and so forth, or you can potentially solve it with science.
Sure. Sure.
So it's one of those things, right, that post industrialization era of of post scarcity, or whatever you want to call it, where technology has advanced to the point where it was able to reverse any type of damage that accelerated industry created, right? Like the industry accelerates, it creates pollution, it creates other issues, it creates bad working environments. It continues to accelerate to the point where we now have the technology to reverse all of that damage, right, from the past or what. So getting to that point, I think, so as a public good, I mean, I think, yeah, it's completely necessary. Our rivers need to be clean, our water needs to be clean, right? The farms need to produce.
Yeah. It's a must.
Yeah.
I say.
Okay, go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to tell a bad joke, and now you ruined it.
Oh, well, there's like little things, like as a public, I mean, you can draw a parallel for everything. Like, there's, are you familiar with what a bioswale is?
Bioswale, no.
Yeah, they're like, or it's like a swall. Have you ever noticed when you're walking down a sidewalk how there's like a there's like a depressed area of planted shrubbery? It's meant to catch water runoff, right? Rainwater runoff.
Yeah. Are these intentional? Are you saying these are man-made or?
Yeah. And many times they're put into code, like city code, where if you're building sidewalk or building new development, you need some type of bioswale. Hold on.
No problem. So, how's everybody doing? Andy's back. Yeah. All
right. Yeah. So bioswale. Basically, there's certain species of plants that are really good at filtering water, right? Taking out heavy metal contamination or whatnot from the runoff. and there's all sorts of different groups of people that are able to cultivate various plants that are especially good at doing this, and strategically placing these things around different cities to filter water runoff, so on and so forth. And so that is like a basic scientific effort, right? That is for the public, whether people realize it or not. And I know that people just throw their cigarette butts in these things, or
Yeah.
they end up littered, right? But they're all over, and it is not just for drainage, right? To prevent flooding in certain developments where the dirt work has been, curated to run down to some type of retention pond that also
Mm.
filters any type of heavy metal contamination, but specifically in cities alongside sidewalks. And sometimes they're decorative, you can make them decorative, but really crucial, for cities to have certain places like this, and then use actual natural biology to naturally filter and remove heavy metals and whatnot.
So great examples of science as a public good, and obviously these things are needed. Different uses for you have to have the knowledge, to your point, of like the best kind of vegetation or what have you to put in a particular area, know what kind of impact it will have on the water, and be able to like direct the stream of runoff water to another place where it's further clean, and like just the knowledge of that and the implementation is a good example of science as a public good, right? And that people could do in their own communities, or on smaller levels, if they had the knowledge, if the information were publicly available and the resources
Yeah.
were there for them to do it.
Yeah.
So
Like growing up in Los Angeles, at the storm drains, you always see like this goes to the ocean, and then you see like a dead fish, kind of little diagram, I think. And so, like when you're little, you're like, oh my goodness, if I litter, like this is gonna go kill a fish.
yeah, at least
You,
one.
you know what I mean? And so, yeah. Anyway.
You mentioned saving the salmon. Yeah. Well,
Goodness.
well, I mean, you brought it up. I mean, I know you're an avid fisherman.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that? What's that like? I mean, when you think about that, I mean, one, here goes the joke I was going to make. It sounds like an upstream battle. Hold on.
Mhm.
But no, how does that actually go? Like, I mean, a little dramatic effect, comic relief. What is that process though? Like typically, when you say like save the salmon,
Oh,
right?
whoa, goodness.
Bears eat salmon, other fish eat salmon. Many salmon don't make the commute upstream. Like, what is that? How can science save salmon?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's tough because the waterways, right, that many salmonid species have traversed, over time, are much different than their natural, um, than in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's tough. Salmon are a key. Gosh, dude, I should probably have fish biologists on here talking about this. I just catch them. I just catch them. But yeah. So at least on the Columbia River, what we've seen, okay, is with the antiquated dams, they've created slack water in which predator species of fish have been able to thrive. Things like bass and walleye and the northern pike minnow, various species, but also various birds have been able to kind of hunt these slack water sections. Um, Before the dams, the salmon smolt, after being born, they were able to use the flow of the river to essentially carry them out to sea,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they could, hang out if they didn't want to travel, at that particular moment or something. With the slack water, when they're very tiny, tiny smolt, they have to swim, right? And it takes an immense amount of energy to actually swim through that slack water. And it also, because of the prevalence of the predator species of fish that thrive in slack water conditions, right? The smolt, the salmon smolt, the baby salmon, are susceptible to getting hunted down by some of these predator fish. Whereas in the past, right, there's so many, and the river, is just taking them out to sea, so they can just kind of float there and not spend so much energy, and they have a greater chance of survival. And so what people don't realize is that salmon are really a keystone species, right? There's not very many things, and this is like up here in the Pacific Northwest, where we have these green forests all over, right, and these huge trees, and all these different waterways. All these, the smallest little creeks and streams, up in the mountains, are actually, salmon spawning grounds, and were for many, many, many years, right? Many thousands of years. And they can directly attribute a lot of this green forest up here in the Pacific Northwest. And this is from Northern California or Central California all the way up to Alaska, essentially. This sort of ecology can be almost directly attributed to the salmon species going out to the ocean and bringing the marine nutrients back into the most remote regions of the of the forest. And what ends up happening is the scavengers or the bears, they go and they eat all these salmon, because what happens to salmon once they spawn, once they get back to the creeks, they die, right? That is their life cycle. They die, they end up on the shores. Scavengers come, and for thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years, don't quote me. Don't quote me.
Lots of years.
They have been spreading their scat, which has marine nutrients all throughout the Pacific Northwest, which is highly unusual for a region to have like fertilizer, right? That's from the most remote, from the open ocean, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So that is like very strange. And then you saw all sorts of Native American type of stories of using fish as fertilizer, for farming, right, for agriculture and whatnot, and showing the people, that the settlers, or people that came over, how to use fish. So there's some merit there, like in using marine nutrients to farm and to grow. So they attribute that to like these massive, these old growth forests, where we have these giant sequoias and these huge trees. And over time, obviously the environment has changed for the salmon. Dams over 100 years ago now, came in, and we've seen the salmon species slowly decline. With the salmon species slowly declining, what ends up happening? The species out there that feed on salmon, right, start to suffer. And so we've seen the resident orca population here in the Pacific Northwest slowly dwindle, and have to face some adversity with a declining salmon population, right? So keystone species in any ecosystem are like the keystone, right? Like without them, not a lot would actually function. People don't necessarily realize that, or it's possible that we can overcome any hindrances or absence of with technology and advancement in technology, as opposed to reversing time, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know, but still, it would be nice to have them there.
It'd be nice to have some salmon.
Yeah.
All right, listen, I'm going to play a couple of responses, a few responses from the original Twitter space, and we'll just kind of hear what they had to say and offer comments should any comment be evoked.
Yeah, I mean, I can just kind of quickly kick us off. I know that there are quite a few different folks who probably have some fantastic opinions on this call around it. I think everything, and it's funny to see, but everything kind of tends to tie back together. So the immediate answer is funding. I think for starters, we need to be thinking regularly about the ways that we fund science and the pros and cons of each individual funding primitive that comes up. So, for example, impact certificates are one potential funding primitive for science that have pros and cons. Intellectual property is another funding primitive for science that has pros and cons. But any primitive that we use and any place that we plug it into a larger system of science will have adverse effects that we hadn't necessarily considered. So I think that the very first thing in making science a public good is being incredibly diligent about the ways that we are financializing science. So I will go ahead and say, I do believe that the greatest gift that the DeSci space can give to academia is a sustainable business model for journals, a sustainable, non-extractive. So you currently have major journals which are taking 50% profit margins on pretty much every paper that gets published. And then on the other side, you have open access journals, which oftentimes have problems staying afloat because while their information is open, their journal itself, kind of the business model behind it, has some serious flaws at times, or they often do have flaws. It's about finding something in between the two of those that doesn't restrict access immediately.
End of clip. I'll start by saying, yeah, I mean, seems maybe if you're in the middle of the space trying to figure out the best way to launch a journal, you've already figured this out, or at least figured that this is an issue, and that is you have to have some funding support behind a journal. Even if you want to provide the journal for free, someone has to pay for it. For it to be at the level of some of the top tier journals, if you want to convince prominent or even up and coming researchers to publish in that journal has to have certain characteristics that have to be bought, right? But then that poses an access issue, because if you're charging the public, then how are we different than any other journal? What is your kind of thought about his perspective, my perspective, or the problem in general?
Oh my goodness. Well, we've gone over it a bit, right? I don't know if it is the greatest gift that DeSci can give academia, right? But any consortium of people that are interested in creating a legitimate journal can come together, and make a journal for the sciences in some fashion and go seek funding. I think when you put it into Web3, right, or DeSci or whatever this hashtag is that people are talking about, I think that creating something like a DAO, getting people organized, having people contribute, right, contributing, organizing, coming together. These are sort of one of the only use cases in Web3 that actually, crypto and DAO tokens are able to do, that we've really seen.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I mean, it's like, I mean, that is a real reason. So in a real use case.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think that, gosh, you don't need Web3 to do it. However, I think that people sort of feel like they have some type of financial incentive to come together and work together to create, solutions for various social problems. And if a DAO is centered on science, academia, and scientific journalism, then they can kind of hone in on that and probably do a pretty phenomenal job, because there is like some semblance of remuneration for that effort, right? And the DAO can always create that for itself as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. I'm going to go to the next reply here. Let's see.
I think another thing that's worth considering is kind of the underlying infrastructure itself. So, thinking about how we encode the principles of open access into the foundational digital technologies that kind of underlie the larger DeSci stack. And that is one of the things that we're doing at DeSci Labs is trying to make sure that as much of the information as humanly possible is open and accessible to anyone who wants it. So I think it's rethinking some of the technology behind the scenes and being very careful and deliberate about funding primitives that are out there. So anyone have thoughts with regards to that?
I'll start with you.
Well, that's if there's a budget constraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that complete and total freedom and decentralization might actually be better. So that sounds like there's certain parameters, right, that are required, to receive funding, and that sort of tells me that there's some type of very specific budget per company type of allocation that they're working with. However, I think that if you get all of the academics in the world, all of the scientists in laboratories and universities in the world into a DAO, and then they could actually, as a collective type of mind, vote and pick various things, even if they're like late stage, phase 2, phase 3 trials, the public being able to choose what they want to fund. There's no actual limit on the funding capability, right, for science. Like if you think about it, right, like there's, because you could have all sorts of different hedge funds, venture funds, early or late stage, also retail, just any individual college student that is like, hey, like this is interesting. How much do they need? And maybe if you have some type of technocratic board that can help, determine how much they would need to reach some type of commercial success if it's feasible, then there is no limit, right? So, and that's where you would want to go, I think, with DeSci. That's my opinion. That I would rather go there where there's no limit. Essentially, there's no preordained budget, per project. The world can decide what needs funding, right? As opposed to, you know what I mean? Because then, yeah, like it could be, it could be a little pill that stops war. You take it, and all the dictators in the world are like, I don't want to fight anymore. Like wouldn't people want to fund that? I think.
Yeah, that's called Valium. Just chill out, man. No
I think
war.
Steven's working on the anti-war.
Anti-war pill. It's shrooms. That makes sense.
Steven.
All right. Hey, Steven. All right. So then, what does that mean for grant makers in that space? Like the current. I understand that part of the objective is to kind of reimagine and reshape the structure, but like then what happens to grant money in this model?
I think grant money is fine. Why not? It's just like what you see with grants a lot of times is like it's who's a better writer, who can write more persuasively and get their material in front of the right person, right? And then who has relationship, who has a relationship specifically with the people that make the decisions on where that money is going. You know what I mean? I've received grants in the past, large dollar grants, and I find what we were doing and what we were providing the government right at that time was 100% necessary, right? But also there's like a lot of waste as well, and maybe there's some other people that could have put together the same type of package, and maybe they didn't have the person's cell phone number. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's, I think that it's necessary. I think grants are fine. You know, maybe we should just eliminate things that like eliminate cost altogether.
A cashless, moneyless society. We just barter. I mean, at some point though, I mean, the interesting question is always, even if you put the power in the hands of a DAO or in the hands of every citizen, there will still be some ways to recognize that more people, in terms of funding, will have more influence than others, and therefore you would target the people with more influence if you wanted to get your specific project funded. Like maybe there's funding for every project for sure, but if there's a vote, then that vote is correlated to the ability to fund, then we're still in a similar dilemma. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's an answer. You're welcome to reply, but I don't know if I'm asking a
Man, you know
question as
what?
much
In
as
order for this model to work, you need
Yeah.
community engagement, but you need the right audience. You know what I mean? You need people like the science DAO could flourish with the right group of people, expanding outwards in the right, you know, with the right audience. You know, like this adopter cell project is like, bro, you know, Dr. Jaume is on the cusp of curing diabetes. You know, you need people that want to be there to be part of that sort of thing, as opposed to people that just buy in for price action and cryptocurrency, right? It's a different, it's just a different audience. And so if the DAO can plug away until they find that audience and find the people that are interested in what is going on, then I think it, yeah,
from there.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, one possible thing with any potential decentralized models for funding journals, and I think we've mentioned this, we touched on this during the decentralized talk that I was last part of, and it was also maybe covered in the recent Twitter space between Journo DAO and DeSci World. But I think there could be some interesting territory to explore for decentralized editorial kind of boards or control models. I'm not sure how much precedent there really is at this stage. I know that the tools that we're exploring with Journo DAO are kind of moving in this direction, but I'm not quite sure if we're at that point yet. And I guess I'm wondering what the trade-offs would be if we decentralize editorial control that could still be, you know, susceptible to whales and everything.
Yeah, so Joey, one of the things that I put in the proposal for our journal is kind of exactly that, the decentralization of editorial controls. That way everyone who has a contribution can make some kind of post, but what will be kind of the weight of the evaluation of the post can come from the entire community of accredited, you know, published authorities, that is, right. so that we're not kind of selectively choosing the voices, but all the information is being weighted separately, differently. I mean, we have talked about that. I'm not sure if you had anything to contribute to that point, but it is good for me to at least know that, you know, other people are talking about kind of moving in that same direction.
Oh yeah. I think that's your wheelhouse, Ken. You know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're putting that deck together. I'm in full support. You know, the model that you were putting together, I think is awesome. You know, having some type of vetting process, or like accredited editors involved in the process, and then be able to you know, process submissions.
Yeah.
In that way, it sounds like you're a bit of a technocratic, you know, type of philosopher as well, right?
A bit, yeah. A bit, yeah. I mean, it's that level of the trust, the buy-in. Everyone, you have to have a certain level of buy-in from the community, and you have to also have a certain level of authority to kind of create the buy-in. But I don't think you can be too heavy on either side. Like you can't just be loosey goosey and decide that everything that's published is equal,
Yeah.
because it's not. And you also don't want that center of authority to be so heavy-handed that um, that new voices aren't entering the space,
Right.
and that we're just recreating the same problem. So yeah, I mean, I do share again a lot of maybe a lot of the philosophy in the space, and I think you and I have a lot of commonalities with regard to how I see decentralized science. So as I've pointed out before, I'm just kind of happy to be in the position to have some kind of input in the space, I guess.
Oh,
Um,
bro, I think you're gonna do great, and
yeah,
I think that we're really, really early.
for
You
sure.
know, yeah. We're so early to the point where like the ETH retail space is still like working itself out on what it actually wants to see. One day it's memes, the next day it's utility, the next day it's some type of mystery, something. Right. And so
Yeah.
the audience, no, bro, I mean,
Nah, yeah, you're right.
yeah, and the audience for this type of work is not quite there. So you just know, like, if you have that vision, and this goes with any type of emerging sector in an industry, right? If you have that vision, knowing that that space will materialize at some point in the future, and that you're not like it's no problem as long as you're having fun and you're enjoying the process of creating what will come sometime in the future. You can be super early and not get burnt out or anything.
Yeah.
So I've been like early. Man, there's been a few times in my life where I was years too early for the market.
Mm.
Years too early for the market, and eventually there's I'm like, oh my goodness, there's no product market fit here. And then like years later there is, right? So
Yeah.
it's yeah.
That's you. I'm like, what is? Let's see. Last take on this specific
Yeah,
subtopic.
the quick point before I cut out again is that there could be potentially some business model where you can like tokenize and distribute editorial control as a way of raising funds, and then that can allow for the content itself to not be without paywalls, but maybe you incur some other kind of downsides there as well.
And this is something that you and I've talked about a lot. Are if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's something that you have wanted to see happen. And my pushback is always the idea that what it may appear to be in the public to incentivize people to participate, like almost like a pay for review, pay for play kind of situation that I think is maybe detrimental,
Right.
specifically for a budding resource that is going to come out the gate with some particular issues and trying to solidify its legitimacy.
Yeah, you know what? That is your thought process is very similar to Budash's thought process on community ran projects, right? When there is some type of central semblance of leadership or whatnot, everybody's looking to somebody, and in this case, it would be some type of reward system that people do something in expectation of something else. Whereas we've seen some of the most successful projects out there be 100% community ran type projects. And so that's
Yeah.
the there is that
Yeah.
there is that, yeah, man. If you create a reward system right there at the beginning, then there's a lot of people doing things with expectation as opposed to the natural beauty, right, of the work that they're doing. right? The
Yep.
essence. Yeah. So
Cool. So to follow up with that, tokenizing DeSci.
Yeah, tokenizing, right? And that's what it comes down to is that I think Web3, right? Decentralizing this governance of the process, I think it has a huge potential to it. And there was something I posted, shared a talk, a presentation basically about kind of doing that beforehand. And I'll share that link in the comments here in a minute. But yeah, really the ability to open up this publishing chain, and that's sort of what Eric was talking about with impact certificates. So I guess I'll try and give a brief overview of what my interpretation of that is, just to give a little background for anybody who's not familiar with the concept of an impact certificate. It's basically just it's an on-chain record of that allows sort of, I guess, a quantitative evaluation of somebody's contribution to science, and so it's kind of like a citation that can be traced on chain. But sort of, I guess, allows some sort of quantitative or even qualitative estimation of that impact. So, Eric, I don't know if you can clarify a little bit more, describe what that looks like.
I'll start with you.
yeah, so and this is something that we talked about prior to launch, and it's still something that we are planning on implementing. So there's this thing called a C score, right? And I think it's Google development, and it's how many people out there in the world actually cite your peer-reviewed paper, right? And it gives you essentially like a reputation score. We can do that, right? We can essentially assign. So in the decentralized science style journal, the contributors or the editors or people that cite, they can essentially apply a token. We call them tokens, right? It can be an NFT, right? It can be like if they contribute, boom, they mint an NFT, and then they have a certain number of these. God, they keep pinging me. Then they would have a certain number of these merit score type of things to keep track of what their contribution or their reputation or how much they're contributing to the space, and that would be measurable and on the ledger, right? And so we have various, like in the background, something that people may not understand or may not realize. In the background, the things that we're working on are things like this, various NFTs, so that people in the United States can self-declare their accreditation status, right? And having that accreditation status be good for however long it needs to be. I think it's 12 months, like a 1-year period, and then have to redeclare that. So just in case, if they're participating in any investment opportunities that require some type of accreditation, it's recorded, like their status is recorded on the blockchain, right? And there's a record of them declaring that status, right? Also, any type of contribution. It's crazy the direction that NFTs went, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really nuts the direction that NFTs went. And so when you're trying to like create a serious use for NFTs, it almost feels like an uphill battle, right? Because you say NFTs, and then immediately people are thinking of like an ape or like a penguin. It's like, goodness, it's not that. It's so, and now it's an uphill battle for anybody trying to use the actual tech for serious things, right? Because you could be telling a publisher or a scientist that's going to cite some type of peer-reviewed paper that they can attribute an NFT to that. They're also going to be thinking about a penguin, right? And so now, like, okay, any seriousness that we could have had that could have contributed greatly to the world, or reorganized things onto the ledger as opposed to some type of antiquated process, has now been bastardized by JPEG art. So there's some people like us, that are trying to make serious use cases for NFTs, and then there's like an entire retail space that does not care.
No, that's 100% true. I fully agree. If your entry to NFT is like you said, some JPEG, then when you hear NFT, you're gonna instantly go to, oh no, I don't want to be associated with that. Like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
And so they're like, and so now there's like this new onus to re-educate folks, serious players, on why they should participate in this process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving to impact certificates as question number 7, the penultimate question of the day. We'll try to get this wrapped soon.
It's a larger part of an impact market, but the idea is that you would have, let's say, a large philanthropist or an organization like corporation kind of thing that want to see a specific impact come about in the world. Let's say it's a corporation that is passionate about biotech research, or it's a philanthropist who's passionate about environmental disasters, right? They could donate a pool of money. Let's say they were willing to give $5 million, $10 million, $100 million, whatever it actually is, towards funding research in that specific area. Any team could spin up and release an impact certificate and basically say, hey, we're going to try and solve this. At the end, what they're all fighting for is that $100 million pool. But that impact certificate, that NFT, can be traded back and forth between organizations and speculators. So that NFT represents their stake in the project. If their project is selected by whoever put down the money at the beginning to win the retroactive prize pool, whoever's holding that NFT would essentially get that money, right? So what's interesting here is the fact that you enable speculation on kind of market dynamics to come into play on science itself, while still being able to isolate individual scientists from some of that speculation. So if I start out with 1,000 different projects that each have an impact certificate that they've spun up, 900 of them are going to fall by the wayside almost immediately. Someone can buy that impact certificate. The money goes directly to the scientist towards funding science. But then as you start to narrow down the field, each one of those impact certificates becomes more and more valuable.
Your space, Joey.
I think that gamifying and putting the reward first can work for challenges, right? I know somebody that is spinning up like a challenge first type of thing, because it does incentivize people to work faster, right? And set new records. It's been shown that you have a challenge, people contribute to that challenge, and then people work really hard to try to attain that, especially if like the dollar figure, goes really high and whatnot. I think gamifying it can be kind of fun. I see the mechanics there, but it's gosh, there's a lot of waste. I think in some of these, there's a lot of effort, a lot of turning of wheels. I wonder if there is like a more direct way to finding those needles in the haystack, so to speak. Mainly because, gosh, I'll give a perspective. This is on government contracts, okay? Government contracts. It's like if there is some, if there's some contract out there for, building a road or having a flagger, having a team of flaggers for some type of road work or some type of dirt work out, where they're rearranging the landscape and whatnot. Many of these are government contracts, right? You need a SAMS number, you need a specific corporation. A certain percentage of those are for, different demographics of people. Okay, it could be like women-owned business, right? It could be minority-owned business. There's very specific things, and a percentage of all those SAM contracts have to go to these specific demographics of business owners.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, these, it's very similar to what he's maybe I don't fully understand like what he's talking about, right? But there's all this money, these government contracts, and people put together these impact certificates, right? And they're able to sort of structure their various corporations in different ways where they can appeal and get a certain percentage of these government contracts based on the way they've structured their company, right? It can
Right.
be like a Russian business owner, right, that has 51% of the company actually owned by like a shell company that's owned by a woman, right? And
Right.
all of a sudden it's a women-owned business, and they get that like the 5% or 10% for women. And that hurts actual women-owned businesses, right? Like
Right.
actual businesses that are out there trying to do the work. They're competing with people that have created these packages. And so the only thing that I worry about on impact certificates, right, and this is where I would think that decentralized decision making and so a bit of technocratic leadership could sort of cut through, because you eliminate a lot of the bureaucracy involved in some of these government contracts, right, and processing these different applications. But you almost worry on like how gamifiable it is, and how they're able to put together various packages to try to attain part of that reward pool or whatever it is, similar to how people already do it with government contracts. Like it's nothing new, right? Like here there's a budget, the Green New Deal or something, right?
Yeah.
There's this huge budget out there, and then you have a bunch of people scrambling to put together these packages to try to get some of that. So what he's talking about is nothing. It's nothing really new. It's just it would cut through some bureaucracy and maybe put together, not be a public thing, but private sector type of philanthropy. I mean, that's what it is. That's what it's saying.
No, yeah, I agree. Yeah. g- Another example of that, I guess, would be Second Iraq War. Like the government security contracts, everybody was then putting together some kind of security firm so they can go be private security in the desert, right? Like, oh, this is where the money is. This is then what I need to do, and I need to structure a company that fits the kind of CFP so that I can get some of this money, right?
Yeah.
Like, I take your point. I think that could be potentially problematic.
It's effective. Then you got a bunch of people
Yeah.
scrambling to make the right kind of company.
Yeah, but here's the problem with that then, because now what you get is not much different than what you have now. Like whether you're talking about a student in school or the person who becomes a researcher, your parents say, hey, don't follow this career path or that one because this one is not where the money is. So like you can, or don't follow this area of research. You want to be in this kind of lab because that's where the money is. So in other words, the money from the outside can influence the research or the number of people willing to conduct said research just because there's more income streams or it's more lucrative overall to find a cure for cancer or diabetes than it is to create a better sticky band-aid, like whatever. Yeah. So I think that's where the potential pitfall comes. But hey,
yeah,
just
and we've seen that. I mean, we've seen it, right? I think it's tough, right? When you have like general retail out there, okay, and then like you have people in the sciences, you're going to have people that have that are good at speaking, okay, that are in the space, that are able to articulate via jargon various things and put new spins on things that already exist to apply them to DeSci and make people feel like it's a new innovation, when really it's like a repackaging of things that exist that already have their set, groups of issues out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that it takes some critical thinking. Just, you got to get people thinking critically. I think some of the time, I think it can be great, right? If a company wants to do that, they can. There's nothing wrong with it. If a company is like, hey, if Elon is like, here's $100 million for whoever comes up with the best climate solution, whatever, then yeah, you'll have people creating various different entities and different packages, and you will spur some innovation. You'll get it going. If the government wants to put out some government contracts for, there's one that's like there's a spotted owl that lives in old growth forests. And when loggers want to go in and cut down an old growth forest, there's surveying contracts out there to see whether this one spotted owl still has habitat in this forest. And if it does, these are like 5-year long contracts, right? They're like millions of dollars, some of these contracts. If there is any habitat still where the spotted owl is present in the old growth forest, then the loggers cannot come in, right? And so there's all sorts of of contracts out there. Anyway, I'm rambling, just giving people something maybe they've never heard about it.
No, I've not heard of this. Well, I've heard of spotted owls, but I'm not familiar with that the survey process, and I think it's very interesting. So, final question before we play the final clip. What's the thing that you used to say shooting a shot as
Kobe.
a kid growing up? Kobe. This is the number 8 question. Let's see. Here we go. Number 8. 8 for Mamba. The impact of impact certificates for social science. For science journals. Here we go.
So I'm a huge fan of impact certificates in the context that they're a novel funding primitive that we haven't seen before. I think that there are a ton of design considerations which still need to be very carefully weighed. So not saying it's a perfect, flawless system. Just want to start out with that disclaimer, but that it's interesting and thought-provoking. So yeah, the gist of an impact certificate is that it gives a scientist the ability to accrue funding throughout the entire life cycle of a project. So you get funding at the beginning, you get funding through the middle of the project, and you can get funding at the end. And that's very different from a lot of original, I guess, traditional funding primitives. Like with intellectual property, you're going to get funding exclusively at the end of the project. With grants, you're going to get funding exclusively at the beginning of the project. And finding different ways to allocate money and kind of keep it flowing in is definitely unique. So what an impact certificate actually is.
So I rearranged this to kind of maybe sell the idea of the impact certificate. Final take. With that in mind, meaning grants, you get paid up front. You here's some money, go produce what you said. IP is, hey, I've made something, go pay me for it. The impact certificate is, hey, I'm making something, pay me now, pay me as I go through, pay me at the end. It provides a steady flow of income. For researchers, does that change your opinion as to, I don't know, does it change you, does it move you one way or another?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think that there is a use there. Does it solve everything? Would I speak that this type of financing is going to solve everything? I don't know. I think that various rounds of funding are also very useful in getting good seed investors in that can essentially take the lead or help facilitate future rounds of funding. I think are more valuable or just as valuable, right? It wouldn't be anything it wouldn't be anything to gosh, for the science style, for instance, we really want to focus on very early stage companies, and by doing that we can help facilitate there at the ground floor through a network, right, for future rounds of funding. So if we're involved in, say, the seed, and there is XYZ fund inside of the science DAO already present, then it might be a safer bet for them to get in at Series A when there's a bit more proof of concept. The risk for the seed has been spread amongst, potentially 1,000 people, right?
Right.
And because the risk was spread, it wasn't too difficult to fund that seed. With that seed, they're able to prove concept. It's less risky at Series A, and then potentially the more specific, concentrated funds would be more would be more inclined to fund at a less riskier stage. So I think the impact certificate that's great, but it's still like, does that mean a whole DAO is going to create an impact certificate? That's cool.
Fair.
What's in it for the DAO? Because originally he was talking about a philanthropic type of effort, large corporation trying to solve a specific problem and putting the funding out there, right? The issue with that, I think, is it's less snappy, right? Because it's essentially free money based on what kind of package you were able to create. It doesn't put any pressure on the entrepreneurs, on the founders to drive growth forward, except to get like maybe some more funding in the future. I think that there needs to be pressure, right? There has to be a bit of pressure on some people. A pure philanthropic effort is great, but that's no different than a grant. I think that you could put together like decentralized grants as well. I think that the seed stage getting to the Series A, I think that it puts pressure. If you decentrally fund the initial stage, it eliminates or de-risks the situation to spread it amongst lots of people. So you're able to fund more seeds. Then that Series A, it gets them to that point for that next round of funding, where a larger fund or people that are involved in that initial seed are able to come forth and be like, hey, I want to be part of this next step. And then they can put big money. They can write a big check, So I think it's very important for at least the Science DAO specifically to bring in various fund managers, institutions that want to that aren't necessarily in that seed stage type of investment strategy for their fund, but they can see that lots of people will have like a lower risk seed fund for something that they might be interested in the future, and then they would want to stick around and see where things get going, and then be first in line. Have a preferred Series A, be first in line for that, right?
Yeah.
So that's my thought. I don't have a perfect mind, Ken. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm sure there's people out there.
Don't you though? Don't you?
Look, there's people out there that have a better grasp on this than I do. Reinventing the wheel or something is going to be tough. Impact certificates. It sounds like a repackaged SAM contract. You know what I mean to me, but I'm sure it's different than that. You know what I mean? I'm sure that if I was a scientist, I'd be gunning for an impact certificate.
you know, Joey, at the risk of kind of beating the horse, we're looking to solve some specific issues, and I believe it starts with the ability to collect and disseminate information. I believe this journal is pivotal to what it is trying to do. And I believe that the answer to perfect this process that so many people are looking at is already out there. It's out there, but it's maybe segmented in such a way where we're not going to create something new. We're going to take certain things that already exist and we're going to move them in such a way where it makes sense and it's going to work. So I'm always interested, even if it sounds like kind of rehashing the same conversation, because just a 1 degree kind of change in thought can maybe help us see things slightly differently and maybe give us the solution that we're looking for or put us on the right path. So, I don't know what it sounds like to the audience, but there's clearly, if you Google this yourselves, folks, you go on YouTube, you go on podcasts, you're going to find a lot of people having the same conversation. There of the people who are concentrated in decentralized science, this is the big question that people are trying to solve. Or one of the bigger questions that people are trying to solve. And so, bear with us as we figure it out. Let's hope that we're the first to really find the solid solution. With that in mind, Joey, do you have any last words for the folks?
Kobe Bryant.
Kobe, man. The greatest. Second greatest, but greatest today. Joey, don't go. Thanks, guys.